Yes, welcome back. Week 6. We are in week 6. Man, this course is moving right along, isn't it? It doesn't take long for 8 weeks to pass right on by. What are we doing in week 6? Like I said, looking at our course overview, we're going to get into vulnerability management, development, and purple teaming. Actually, I'm going to open this up a little bit wider than just purple teaming. We're going to talk about cybersecurity teaming in a holistic manner. And this week, we're reading chapters 16, 17, 18. We've got our threaded discussions as well as your journal article review. All right, let's get into our lectures for this week. Vulnerability management. I will tell you, this is a big part of what we do day to day from a cybersecurity perspective. Two things to understand: the difference between vulnerability management and compliance management. When we start talking scans, many times this is an area that sometimes confuses new people coming into the field. There's a fundamental difference between how we scan for vulnerabilities or weaknesses in our systems and how we scan for compliance. Are our systems hardened? Are they configured properly? For this class, we're talking about vulnerability management, meaning that we know that there are some weaknesses, vulnerabilities, and we want to be able to scan for those so we can patch and fix those vulnerabilities. So like I say, so what is vulnerability management? It's a flaw. First, a vulnerability. It's a flaw in the system that can leave something open for an attack. I mean, really, that's a vulnerability. For instance, if I went to work today and said, if I went to work and I tell you that I left my window open. Yep, left it wide open. Is that a vulnerability? Of course it is. Someone could get into my window, walk through the window, and steal all of my prized possessions in my house. However, if I told you that I live on the 15th floor of an apartment complex, then you probably say, well, yeah, it's still a vulnerability, but now, like we talked about earlier with risk, the likelihood of that happening have decreased tremendously. So when we talk about vulnerabilities, threat, vulnerability, likelihood are all a big part of that. So when we have a weakness or some type of vulnerability in our systems, we want a way of detecting that. So that's why we use this process of scanning. Some of the tools we use, you may hear talk about Tenable, which is made by a company called Nessus, Tenable is the company. Nessus is the tool, and you hear it sometimes called Security Center. But this is one of the most popular tools out there for scanning. There are other scanning engines, but this is probably one of the most popular ones used in multiple applications. Now, why do we scan? Again, we want to be able to identify where weaknesses are, where vulnerabilities exist. And then we want to be able to patch our applications, third-party applications, our operating systems, switches, routers. Yeah, all those devices have an operating system that runs in there that have vulnerabilities and that can be patched. Our virtualization tools, like VMware, all of these things have vulnerabilities, and that's why they push out patches constantly. Probably just like your phone, you're constantly getting patches. Why did they do that? To close a weakness or a vulnerability. So when we think about scanning, it's really a process, and I'm using, like I say, kind of this Nessus tool as a backdrop. But again, remember, this works basically the same for any type of scan tool you have. We have this thing they call plugins, and all a plugin is that's the actual vulnerability information and the mitigation instructions. So, and for instance, the Nessus tool, Tenable, they build these vulnerability packages or plugins monthly, and you can download these plugins from the Tenable website, update your engine, your scan engine, so that way you've got the most current plugins. So then once you have all the plugins, then you can build a scan policy. Now what the scan policy is, now how do I want to scan in my environment? Do I want to scan all my machines? Do I want to do a sampling of those? Am I looking for certain ports, protocols, services? And then from there, we can actually build what we call an active scan. And that's where the kind of the when, where. And you can set this particular tool up to where it will scan on any schedule. You may want to, now the thing about scans, when you're running a scan, because this, especially in a larger network, it takes a lot of resources to run this scan. So it's going to take a lot of bandwidth, because this scanning tool is going to go out to every asset on your network that you've identified, and it's going to run a bit of code that's going to go through and look at all the applications on every host, on every server, whatever it is you may be scanning. So if you think about that, and you multiply that times the number of host clients you have on your network, now you're talking a lot of bandwidth. So if you try to run a scan in the middle of the day on a weekday, Wednesday at 10 o'clock, not a good idea, because it's going to just bog your network down. Your users are going to get frustrated because the network has slowed down. Why? Because you have become your own insider threat. Yes, you are doing a distributed denial of service on your own network by trying to run a scan at that time of day. Most of us, what we do, we either run scans at night, or we'll set the engine up where it'll run on the weekends, or at some off off our time that we run those scans. Now, one of the things you want to be aware of with most scan tools, they have what we call a credential scan or uncredential. You always want to run credential scans. And what that means is that now you have a privileged user account that's trusted, so you will actually get a lot more information from a credential scan than you will an uncredential scan. And the biggest part of this, I mean, these first 3 steps, they are pretty automatic. You can set this up where it runs. Where the workload comes in is right here, scan, and this is where most of us fail. I'll be very honest with you. In the security community, many times, especially in smaller organizations who don't have the security manpower, the security footprint to actually do the analysis on these scan results, because this is where the rubber meets the road. Now I'm starting looking at the results of the scan, and I get this long list of vulnerabilities. I'm actually going to walk through this here in a couple of slides of what these scans are and what these vulnerabilities look like. Are they applicable in my environment? Because some scans, even though they may come back and says, hey, this is a vulnerability of number 10, that's a high threat. However, your system, based on the way you're configured and your end user connectivity, that may not be a big threat in your environment. So this is the part where the money is made, and this is many times in our organizations where we put the least amount of energy, is actually doing the analysis and the summaries required. Like I say, this is the tool. Now, there is and you can go out, please, I recommend, go out and Google this, NVD, National Vulnerability Database. This is a government database that actually collects known vulnerabilities for all different types of applications, operating systems, third-party applications, switches, network devices of all different types. And it collects this into a database. And what this database does is then sets up a scoring system of how these vulnerabilities are rated. So when you run a scan, it will give you its basic scoring system. Hey, yeah, this is a very high threat. This may be a low. This may just be informational. Now, what these scoring systems kind of look like is something like this, where we have a excuse me, a CVE score, right? A common vulnerability enumeration score. And what this shows you, like, okay, this is just an example. That gives you the date as well as the actual a reference number. This just happened before. Let's look at this one for NVIDIA, right? It says that NVIDIA Jetson contains a vulnerability in C-boot, where the PCIe controller is initialized without the IO MMMU, which can allow an attacker to with physical access to the target device to read and write to arbitrary memory. Okay, and most of them you can read more information about those, but actually you can go to this database, pick any piece of software that you've got running any application and type it in, and you will see the list, long list, probably hundreds of known vulnerabilities. Now, does that mean that all those vulnerabilities are going to get exploited? No. They're just telling you that these vulnerabilities exist out there. If you spend much time out there, you're going to be scared to even use your computer because, oh my God, all these vulnerabilities, yeah, they exist. And that's why, here again, that's why we do this type of scanning. So we're going to kind of walk you through what an example looks like when we scan. I ran this on Nessus, but here again, any scanning tool is going to give you a similar look, feel, output. So basically, I ran a basic scan on my network. It gave me all the hosts, all the IP addresses on my network, all right? And then for each of those, it showed me what the vulnerabilities were, and these vulnerabilities are rated. And when I look at the way they rate these vulnerabilities, is they color-coded them from red, which is critical, orange is high, yellow, medium, green, low, and the blue is informational, meaning that it's not really a vulnerability, but it's something that you may want to know. And then now when I look at my, so if I look at 192.168.86.1, right, there are 3 medium vulnerabilities, there are 2 low vulnerabilities, and then there's 31 informational notes that came with this. So I can look at all of the host on my network. Now you may say, why do I have these differences? Because I have different software running on different hosts, and some of these hosts are things that don't have a lot of software on them, a lot of applications. So now I can drill down. Let's say now I want to see that, because this is a summary. This gave me a high-level summary. So let's drill down into one of these, okay? Now when I drill down, and I drill down into 192.168.86.1, which was this first one, right? It had 3 medium vulnerabilities, a low, and 31 informational. So now when I look at this, now it breaks all of these out. This is just one page. I can keep going to see everything else. Now what it did here is, you say, well, there's no purple on here. No, what it did, it actually shows that there is a mixture of either informational and mediums, or low and mediums, and it comes out to a purple. But now, what this gives you, you start seeing now what these vulnerabilities are. There are some vulnerabilities in SSL, multiple issues there. I got some DNS vulnerabilities going on. IP forwarding enabled on the firewall, on one of the firewall rules. Not good. So you don't want to forward IPs. DHCP server detection. So I got a DHCP server. Not that that's, that's why it's such a low, because that's not a bad thing to have a DHCP running, but you just want to be aware of that. And then a lot of the informational ones. Now I can even drill down a little deeper. Let's say I want to look at this SSL, right? Here we go. I got this SSL. Now let's break that down deeper. Now you see at the top, my basic scan, IP address, as well as this particular vulnerability. Now this one was a purple, so that meant there were more than one class of vulnerability in there. There was one medium and the rest infos. So it says, let's take a look at this medium. SSL certificate cannot be trusted. All right, that happened to count on one machine, right? It showed up one time. The rest of these are informational. Now, I want to say, well, what does that really mean? Because I'm still drilling. Now, I think you're probably starting to see why the summary or the vulnerability analysis is so time consuming. Because on a tip, this is a very, very small network I ran this on. If you look at a normal organization where you may have 5, 6, 8, 900 hosts, 45, 50 servers, can you imagine now the number of vulnerabilities you're going to see? You're going to have thousands of vulnerabilities to dig through. All right, so let's drill into this a little deeper. What exactly is that? All right, so here, now this gives you the details about this particular vulnerability, or about this plugin. That's the plugin number 501192. All right, so it says the server's X.509 certificate cannot be trusted. It goes into that, and it also gives you a solution. Well, that's a great thing, because whenever it highlights the problem, they always tell you the solution: purchase or generate a proper SSL certificate for this service, meaning update or patch or get the right SSL certificate. So when we think about scanning, now you kind of see what the whole process looks like, from high level all the way down to drilling down into what a vulnerability looks like. Like I say, scanning and vulnerability management itself can take on a life of its own, without a doubt. So that's why you go into many organizations, they have a team. That's what they do, is just vulnerability scanning. Now, the scanning influences patching, because when I look at vulnerabilities, just like this one, it says I need to update my SSL. Well, now that's something that needs to be given to the IT team or whoever does your patching, so you can now patch. And the next time you scan, that particular vulnerability should have been mitigated. But you're going to see a bunch more. All right, let's switch gears real quick and talk about System Development Lifecycle, SDLC. Thinking about System Development Lifecycle. All the processes, all System Development Lifecycle processes have a lot of commonality. Now, you may peel back depending on which model you're using, but they all have things in common. Some of the core common things you're going to see, like I say, is first you got to define what your conceptual definition. What is it you're trying to develop? Okay, what are those things you're trying to develop? Next, you want to see what are your functional requirements at a high level. Well, let's peel out. I think I know what I want to develop. What's the requirements? Who's driving that? What type of control specifications do you need? Now I'm tightening those functional requirements down to more of a technical requirements. Then I'm going to do some type of design review, initial design review with my software of how I want to develop software, because I haven't started coding yet. I'm just doing a design review, basically blocks, basically a kind of a storyboard of how I want to do that. Then I'm going to do a code review, a walkthrough. Now, after I actually start developing code, which I use developing modules, I want to walk through a code review of these modules, do some type of test, and then maintenance. And the biggest part is right here, change management process. Once that code is fielded, now we have to have a change management process in place to track updates and fix actions that's needed when we get things back from the customer. So this is kind of what your system, cradle to grave, from the definition all the way to maintenance, change management. Now, when we think about this, there's a lot of different types or different models. I'm just going to touch on it briefly, a few of these models: Waterfall Model, the Spiral, Agile Software Development, and what we call CI/CD, which is continuous integration, continuous development, delivery, and continuous deployment. So the Waterfall Model, when we think about this Waterfall Model, was developed by Winston Royce in 1970. Like I said, what this model seeks to show you how to look at it as a series of iterative activities. And you see, this is almost a serial process where each water, it's like a waterfall, each one feeds into the other, and there is a somewhat of a feedback loop, but really it is a very serial process. You start at the beginning and you kind of go all the way to the end, and then you deliver a product. This can be, especially in today's environment, right? This can be a very, very kind of a archaic way of doing business, because it can slow down development. Things today move really, really quickly, right? Excuse me. So this process can be very, very thorough, meaning that this product that comes off the end have gone through testing, it's gone through all the rigor, so you're getting a great product. But in today's environment, if you have to wait 1, 2, 3 years to get a product, by the time it pops out this other end, it's probably already obsolete. So this is why many people have been moving away from the waterfall model. Now, this is very similar. We call it a spiral, but it's very similar to the waterfall. But however, what it does, it added multiple iterations to the waterfall process. Each loop in this is a spiral. So let's say we start right here, right? And this is our first spiral, our first loop, where we're going to develop a prototype. So this is where we get prototype 1. We get prototype 1 out to the field and out to the users, and we deliver here. Then we come right back and start our spiral for prototype 2. We're going to get that delivered, come back, prototype 3, and that spiral module, that spiral method keeps going on. So in each of these quadrants, you have different things going on. So you're determining your objectives, you're evaluating alternatives and risk, develop, verify the next level of the product, plan your next phase. So this spiral model just kind of keeps on. Now, back in the 90s, mid-90s, I'm sure you probably all hear this thing called Agile. Yes, it is the greatest buzzword ever, Agile. But this is really where we start breaking away from these previous very rigid models, right? And try to move to a faster approach that puts more emphasis on the customer and quickly developing new functionality. And just to meet our customer needs. Customer needs today, especially with respect to software, with respect to capability, it's moving very fast. So with this agile development process, like I say, it's where you would initiate a project, integrate, test, and as you're integrating, as you're constantly pushing modules out, getting them out to the customer, test, integrate the next module. So now you got this continuous loop, and you're constantly releasing. If you look at a lot of your software companies today, they work with this agile model, and that's why you get a lot of updates, because they're making changes, but they don't want to wait to get those changes out over a year, 2 years. No, they want to push those changes out quickly, and so that way they got capability in that you're using. And like I say, the last one, and this is really a spinoff of Agile. It's pretty much a lot of the same things, but this is where you have continuous integration, continuous delivery, continuous deployment. When we think continuous integration, that's where you're integrating your changes back to your main branch as often as you can, so you can keep those processes moving. Continuous delivery, this is in some organizations in some places you could be releasing daily, weekly, monthly. Well, whatever the business need is, that you're delivering capability updates to the user. And continuous deployment, meaning that now you're getting feedback, returning those changes in as quickly as possible. Like I say, in this integration phase, build, test, deliver it, as well as and now the difference. What's the differences between these two? Automation. At the end of the day, it's automation. The continuous integration piece is the same. But now what we do here, like I said, we're going to push this thing out, do some acceptance testing, deploy it. Then we're going to deploy it into production, which is usually a manual, because with continuous delivery, you want your customer to be able to dictate when they want the next push, right? Then we do a test, that push. Now with continuous deployment, we're doing this automatically, meaning that the customer understands we've set up a cadence, a timeline. Boom, we're pushing these things out on some periodicity. It's automated. We've got software tools in the background that's running to get those pushes out. You see this with patches a lot of times, where patches are being pushed out on a standard periodicity, and they're just being pushed as new threats, new vulnerabilities happen. All right, last thing I think we're going to talk about was cybersecurity teaming. I know that in the lesson we called it purple teaming, but to really understand purple teaming, I think it's important to really look at cybersecurity teaming holistically. Something we call rainbow teaming. Okay, so what is a security team? Security team is comprised of a group of people who are committed to and responsible for evaluating any safety, security, risk, and concerns. So really, if you look at this, there's multiple teams. You may have heard of some of these, like red teams and blue teams, right? And that's kind of where we get purple. But if you look, there are multiple teams. You know, we got red, blue, green, yellow, orange, white, multiple teams. So, and we say, well, what's the differences in all these teams? So let's look at the white team. That white team is really, that's your management, your compliance piece. They are really the coordinators that coordinate the functionality of all these other teams. Yellow team, we look at that yellow team. This is really your software coders and architects, right? These are the individuals who are actually doing your software coding. Now you may say, well, why are they a team? Because they are really, they are at the front end of security. And it's been years we've been trying to get security to the front at the beginning. And this is really where it starts, is with your coders. Because if you can have your software architects and coders code securely up front, that saves a lot of rework time in the back trying to develop security practices at the end. So really that yellow team of understanding how to start building that in up front with your coders. Now who facilitates that? That's the orange team. They are the ones who really facilitate integration and education between the teams, especially the software coding with the yellow team, right? They're the ones who, okay, what type of training do we need to ensure our coders are coding as securely as possible right up front. Now, another team, actually a red team. You've already heard of those, red team. Now, those are offensive security. You have organizations, company who will send a red team in. You can request a red team to come in and attack your network. Offensive. Show us where the vulnerabilities are. That's a red team. Blue teams, like I say, when we think about a blue team, this is what really this class is talking about, is defensive security. Now, how do we put controls in place to defend the network? And then purple team, they integrate defensive and offensive tactics, all right? Now, let's take a look at something very interesting of how these teams actually fit together. So when we think about this from an integration perspective, and this is what they call the color wheel, security, cybersecurity, teaming, color wheel. And it goes back to your third grade. When you first started learning colors, you put certain colors, two colors together, you get a third color. Let's look at it from that perspective. So if I take red team and add that to the blue team, red team attackers, blue team defenders, that's where I get the purple team from. If you remember, red and blue makes purple, right? So the tactics, techniques, and procedures for attackers and defenders, if I bring those together and integrate them into a purple team, now these are the ones who will help us start improving on those tactics, techniques, and procedures. What is the best way to get good at defense? Is having a good offense. So if you want a good defensive player, like I say, I used to play a lot of basketball. What am I going to do? I'm going to put the best defensive guy on the best offensive guy. That's why Michael Jordan got a lot of awards. Most people think just for offense, but you know what? He was one of the best defensive players in the league at the time as well. But why? Because he was good at offense. So he was that purple team guy. All right. Now, if you remember, if you put blue and yellow together, you get what? Green. Yes. So if you bring the blue team, which are the defenders, with the yellow team, the builders, that's where that green team comes in. With the designers. So now what I want to be able to do is have my designers understand defensive security up front. So now I start baking security in, understanding that if my defensive team who understands cybersecurity controls, how to mitigate risk, and they are looking over the shoulder of our software development team, now that's where the tactics, techniques, and procedures for that green team come about. Now that they know how to start training yellow team members based on blue team tactics. All right, what other colors can we mix here? Oh, yes. How do we get orange? Those educators. Yes. By adding our attack team with the blue team. So if I'm going to train, I need to know what the offensive side is. So now if I get my coders working with offensive cyber, now I know how to start training those guys. Here's the threats you're going to be looking for. So this is when you're coding, this is the way you code to start bypassing or mitigating these attack vectors right up front. I know it sounds like, wow, never thought about colors in this perspective. But yeah, this is how all this teaming comes together. Actually, that white team, they're the one that's really at the management level coordinating this level of effort. Cybersecurity teaming. So what did we talk about for week 6? Yeah, vulnerability management, this system or software development lifecycle, the different models associated with that, cybersecurity teaming. All right, guys, hope you have a great week 6. Have questions, please reach out to me. And looking forward to a awesome week 7. Take care. God bless.